everyone, welcome to day 2 of the Advanced Steel Lunch and Learn Week. Today we're going to be looking at some modelling tips and tricks in Advanced Steel. As always, before we get going, could someone just confirm that you can hear me and you can see me okay, please? Okay, thank you, Elias. As with yesterday, we will get straight on with it. Let me just check you can see everything. Make sure that's all good. Okay, we will crack straight on and then we will take any questions at the end. So if you do have any questions, type them in the questions box and I will pick up any questions or comments at the end of the session. Okay, so let's get straight into it. We don't have long today, so we might have to do some more of these sessions in the future, because we just don't have much time in 15 minutes to fit tips and tricks in. So let's crack on. First thing we're going to look at is this little button here. So I'm on the Quick Views tab. The little button here in the middle, turn 2D snaps on or off. So let's say we've got to set some steel work out on this grid line B in here. So what I would do is I would put my UCS onto that point there. I would rotate myself and then I would view on my UCS, and then we can start putting some lines in. For example, we'll just draw to certain points and maybe down to there. We're just setting some random lines out. Now that's all fine, but because we're in a 3D model, you'll see that those lines are not locked onto my XY plane. So those lines are going to the incorrect points. They're going all over the place, which can then mean that your setting out is wrong. Now, if I turn this button on here, turn 2D snaps on or off, what that will do is that will lock my lines onto the XY plane, so our Z depth isn't taken into account at all. So if I draw these lines in a 3D view, I can go from the node here and I could pick this point here. Can you see I have the yellow circle? Even though my cursor is here, the system is finding that point there. If I go up to the node of this rafter here, then across to this rafter here, then down to, say, this column here, up to this column here, although I'm clicking on points that are miles away from my XY plane, the system has locked everything onto that XY plane. So it just means that when we're doing all of our 2D setting out, we can go to this view and we can click any point that we want. We could draw a line from that point there to there, up to there, up to there, and that is all locked in my XY plane. The only thing when using this is if you forget to turn it off, and even if I reset my UCS to world and I go and say let's draw a beam up here over to here, that is now locked onto my XY plane. And that beam, because it's locked onto the XY plane, it has created it. For beams it's ignored it. There are certain objects where you will think, why has it done that? And it's because we still have that on, so we just need to come in and turn that snap off. What I'll do, let me get rid of those lines. So as we're looking at tips and tricks, I can select a line, right click and do select similar. That will select all the lines on that standard layer. When you do select similar, it's looking for objects on that particular layer. So the next thing we'll look at, we've got a base plate connection here. And we've only got one base plate in the model. So I'm going to open up the joint properties. So to get the joint properties, I can select it, right click, choose joint properties. That will open up the dialog box for me. And this is obviously where we create our base plate. Now on the properties tab, we have a name in here, and we sort of feel this is potentially an underutilized part of Advanced Steel. So the base plate is going to come from either the connection engineer or the main contract engineer who's specifying the base plates and the anchors and the welds and things like that. The information that you're given, that will either be on a sheet, it will have a calculation reference, it will have a base plate number. So what we can do in here, if this is base plate 1, we can type in here BP1. For my other base plate that we have here, if I go into the advanced joint properties, apologies, we can call this BP2. Now, there's a couple of benefits of doing this. Say my colleague John is checking my model. He can actually just come in here and he'll have the sheet of calculations. He can double click on the joint and he can see straight away that's base plate 1. So he knows what he needs to check against. The next tip we're going to look at is what we call propagate joints. So this was a new feature for Advanced Steel 2020. Previous to that, if you wanted to copy this base plate around, we would use joint copy or joint copy multiple or joint copy in a group, in a joint group, joint copy multiple in a joint group to copy it around. Don't necessarily need to do that anymore. We can select the joint box, right click, and we have an option here now called propagate joint. If I right click, or if I click on that and choose propagate joint, what the system does is it looks for sections with exactly the same section size and the same model roll. So all of these big columns are the same size and they have the same model roll. Because the system finds those, it copies that joint around automatically. If I take this joint off, and I select, you've got to select the joint box, I right click and choose propagate joint, that's going to put that on there. Now the benefit of propagating is you don't have to select everything. So for joints that have single inputs it works really well. If we've named our joint and I double click on one of these joints, when the dialog opens, it is grayed out because it's part of a group, but it will tell me that that's BP1. So it means that in my model, I know what joint is what. And when someone else is checking, it means that they know what joint is what and what you intend that joint to be. Now, make sure you join me for the drawing session on Wednesday, because I will also show you that we can get this to show on drawings as well, this joint name. So it means that when we get to our drawings, we don't actually have to label our joint types, our base plate types. The system will do it for us automatically. A couple of other bits on propagating. I want to propagate this joint in here, but I can't see the joint box. So because to propagate, you need to select the joint box. Now we could choose advanced joint properties, but this is something that I learnt only a few weeks ago. If we go to the extended modeling tab, in our joint utilities panel, there is a button here called display, and that will display our joint box. So it turns it on automatically, so I don't need to go into the joint properties. Now, if I select this joint box, right click and propagate the joint, because this joint has two beam inputs, it now looks for columns of this exact size and rafters of this exact size, and if it finds them in the model, it will copy that joint around. The same with this joint in here. If I select the joint box, if we have a look at these items over here, I go propagate joint, and the system will put those joints on automatically. Now, for these sorts of connections, propagate joint is excellent, in my opinion. Some of my other colleagues in certain scenarios don't like propagate joint, and I would agree with them, and I would like to explain why and what the system is doing in certain scenarios. So let's put on a quick connection between this rafter and this purlin. So the connection is between a rafter of this size with the model roll rafter and a purlin in here with the section size and the model roll cold roll purlin. If I just select this joint and I right click and I choose propagate, what the system will do is it will look for rafters of that size and purlins of that size, and it will put the joint on, including in here. And you can see in here we have two joint boxes. So if I class check this, I've got two joints on top of each other, because the system puts a joint on between the rafter and this left hand cold rolled, the rafter and the right hand cold rolled. Now there is a clever bit of the system. If I undo that, I appreciate I'm a bit... If I turn off everything in the middle here, the system will only propagate what it sees. So because I want to propagate this single-sided end plate just on the ends, I turn the pieces off where I want the double connection, and it won't put the joint on there. So now it's put the joint on these ones, but it's left, if I turn everything back on, it's left these ones alone. So you do need to be a little bit careful with your propagate. I would always class check after you've propagated, and if it's put two joints on top of each other, that obviously needs to be corrected. I'm just going to turn my joint boxes off and my camera's off. I'll just tidy this view up. Okay, while we're talking about joint boxes, one thing a lot of people don't realize is that you can manipulate the elements of a joint without actually deleting the box, especially on stairs and railings. So we've got, oh, lost my model. We've got a staircase in here. We've got two staircase macros, this one and this one here. So you can see the joint box there and the joint box there. Now you might need to do something special to these joints. We might need to put a big notch in here for whatever reason. I can still apply contours, cuts, notches to a joint without actually having to delete the box itself. So a lot of people think you have to manipulate the macro. Delete the macro to then do things like this. So I've still got my joint properties in here. On the staircase, we could do the same in there. We could, this is drawn manually, this is part of the staircase macro. I can still miter these two together. Oh, I've clicked the wrong part of the element. It's that bit there and that bit there. And of course, as I'm demonstrating this, it's going to go wrong, isn't it? Why is it going wrong? Let's try it over here. There we go. I've mitered that, but if I click on this stringer, I still have the joint properties. So I don't need to delete my macro. The other thing we can do with joints is we can take what the joint has created. So let's have a look at the underside here. This angle cleat here is part of the joint. I know it's part of the joint because if I select it and delete it, the whole joint disappears. But I want that angle with the bolts on this tread here, which is not part of the macro. I can use transform elements, or if you're outside of the UK, advanced copy, and I can say copy that angle and copy it from, let's say, the end point here to the end point here. I can take elements that the macro has created and copy them outside of the macro. Now, this happens quite a lot, so while we've got this, I'll run through this. The system is saying here, you're copying the angle, the bolts and the welds from this stringer and this folded tread, which is a folded beam, to this position here. And if you ever get this green bar, that's the system saying, well, the thing you've told me to copy, I know what it was associated with. Where you've told me to copy it to, I don't know what that is associated with. I can't find the same object because this here is a folded beam. This is a folded plate, and they're different objects. If I click this, it says cannot complete action because mismatching object types. So I can say, okay, well, you're going to have to ignore that or skip it. And those bolts at the moment are now not associated with my folded tread. You can see they're only associated with the angle. If we want to double check that, we go whole definition, and we can see it's only associated with an angle. I can then go to the Objects tab, and I can say, right, reassociate that with the folded tread. And then I can go and start to stretch that angle around to where I need it. I can increase the number of bolts, but it's using all of the objects from the macro. But again, if I select it, I've still got my joint properties. So I don't need to explode the macro. I'm going to run a little bit over because modeling tips and tricks, I could probably do a week's worth of tips and tricks. The next one, I'm just going to put in a cold rolled member here. So I've manually put a member in. I want that to be exactly the same size and have exactly the same properties as this one here. If you go to your Tools tab and we go Match Properties, that is an AutoCAD command, but inside Advanced Steel, it actually works for Advanced Steel objects. So this is my source object, and then this is my destination object. Now, I can control what things it matches. So if I click Settings, it brings up my Advanced Steel dialog box, and you can see that it's matching the section, the material, the coating. Basically, it's matching everything about that beam. So we can check all or none. Then it will bring up the AutoCAD properties. So what AutoCAD properties is it matching? Click OK. That's my destination. That will match everything from that beam there to that beam there. And that's all we've got time for this lunch break. Okay, so as this week is short and sharp, that is our 15 minutes up. I have had a question in from someone. Do all propagated joints remain connected to the master connection? Yes. So if I go, I've got my model here. The joints that I copied using the propagate tool. Come on. Let's just turn on the joint box there. So this is BP1. Just to really over-exaggerate this piece, because I don't want to run too long over the time, although at the speed at which my machine is working. So that's base plate 1. If I go in here and I make this, say, 100 millimeters to over-exaggerate it, you'll see that all of these have updated themselves automatically. So you change one and all of them change. So you can do the propagate. All the propagate does is it uses this command here, create a joint in a joint group, or create a joint in a joint group multiple. So they are all linked. Okay, like we said yesterday, because I can see we've got some new people in for today's session. These are short, sharp tips and tricks. We do have our Greytech Advanced Steel content portal. So that is 4 years worth of Greytech UK webinars that you can watch on demand. So you can either choose the handout and click the link from the handout, or in your web browser, just type in Greytech Advanced Steel content portal. I will put it in the chat window as well, if I can get that up so you can see it. We do also have blogs, so we've got 6 years worth of blogs in there as well. So that's usually these little tips and tricks. And if we keep getting asked lots of things, we'll put them in as blogs. For Greytech customers, we have our Greytech Advantage. So this is where Greytech customers can log in. It's where you download your power packs. All of our Grey Tech events are worldwide events, so our BIM Up conferences. So that's, I think, now going to be over 500-600 classes. You can watch all of that on demand. And finally, our greytech.co.uk events page. So any upcoming webinars, we do a new set of events every quarter. You can find those on the events page, or you can obviously follow me on social media, and I will let everyone know when that is. I can see a few questions coming in there, but that is the end of today's session. But I'll just see a few. All the sessions are being recorded. We are going to, you will get an email at the end of the week when all the sessions are finished from the GoTo webinar training, and we will put a copy of all of the links in there. We will also amalgamate them all together and put them in our content portal and hopefully our YouTube channel as well. Dave, I can see your question. Can you make the divider mark a standard size so it doesn't change when panning in and out? So is that your, I'm taking a bit of a stab here, Dave, but is that your AutoCAD point when you do the divide? So if you type P type, there is a setting at the bottom here that says set size relative to screen. So when you zoom in and out, that will obviously change its size, or you've got set size in absolute units. So if you tick it to absolute units, that will then lock it at 5 units. Hopefully that answers your question, Dave. Miroslav, let me see if I can get to your question. Can we keep a joint in a joint group during advanced copy? Good question. I'm not sure, to be honest with you. Let's see. I'm going to go a little bit haywire this, but let's try those. Include additional connections. Let's copy them that way. So this is trying to copy, it needs to associate with all these elements that I've copied from, because we've got joints in there, we've got purlin joints in there. So I'm just right clicking to ignore all of those. But let's go into the joint properties for this. My gut feeling is no, it won't. No, it won't. So when you do the advanced copy, it's not putting it as part of a group. But Miroslav, what you can do, once we've copied that, you've got these two commands here. You've got add a joint to a group. So we can say, this is the joint, and we want to add it to this group. If I go into this joint now, that's now part of the group. You can, unfortunately, though, Miroslav, only do that one joint at a time. You can't multiple add a joint to a group. You've got to do it one at a time. I don't think in advanced copy there's any other. No, we can attach to levels in advanced copy, but we can't do much else. I'll keep the session running for a few more minutes if anyone does have any questions that they want to ask. But if you don't, thank you very much for joining me today. Make sure you join tomorrow, where we're going to be looking at drawing tips and tricks. Miroslav, there was a PDF file for yesterday's session, but it just contains the links that are the same links in today's PDF. There's nothing actually in that PDF specific to yesterday's one. So if you download the handout from today's one or tomorrow's one or Friday's one, the links will all be the same. There's nothing actually because we just don't have enough time. There's not really too much of a presentation. We just have to get straight into it. Okay, I can't see any more questions coming in. So once again, thank you very much for joining me today, and I hope to see you all for tomorrow's session.